you so much for watching, listening. Totally stoked to have you here. And of course, I want you to subscribe because we have amazing content and the jokes are phenomenal. Okay, maybe not phenomenal, but pretty close. So here's your joke for today. You know, the dude who invented, dude, whatever you want to say, invented the knock knock joke deserves a Nobel Prize. Nobel, get it? You're like, this dumb. I know, but it's kind of par for the course. Anyways, we're starting a new series. Actually, this is like a part 2 series to what we did just last month. And this is Trauma Recovery Part 2. And I think this is really an important series because every single one of us have experienced and have results of trauma in our lives. And when you think of trauma can be the results of anything that happened to you that was like traumatic, whether it's a violent thing, it can be verbally, it can be physically, it can be a car wreck, something that's overt, that can be trauma, resulting in trauma. It also can be a neglect or abandonment. That can be an experience that results in trauma. There could be sexual issues that result in trauma. But the problem with trauma is we oftentimes, when we go through it and something triggers us related to that event, then we have this traumatic response, reaction back to it. And scientists, psychologists have told us, and I can see it absolutely true, and I've observed around me as well as in myself, that when you have those triggers, a lot of times the instincts kick in, and then you wonder, why am I doing what I'm doing? If you haven't unpacked, worked through and received healing, recovery from trauma. So it's really important for us to think about this, to be aware of it. And of course, I'd invite you to pass this on to your friends and relatives, neighbors, because everybody you know has experienced trauma in some shape, fashion, or form. Some of it is recent, some of it goes back to childhood, some of it can be even way further back, even into your toddler or infant years sometimes. You're like, seriously? I'm like, seriously. And what I want to talk about today, though, is Jesus speaks about trauma. And he talks to us in Luke 10 and gives us a parable, and it revolves around trauma. This is the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, you might have heard this parable. Just to do a quick little thumbnail on it, Jesus is answering the question that a religious leader asks him, and the religious leader is trying to justify himself. Who is my neighbor? And to answer the question, Jesus gives this parable. And the thick piece of the parable, the center pivot point for the whole thing, revolves around trauma. And Jesus says there's a man walking, he's like a little story, man walking from Jerusalem to Jericho. As he's walking on the road, bandits jump him. And they're not like thieves, these are bandits, so they have a very violent overtone to them. They jump him, they beat him up, they strip off his clothes, and they leave him half dead. And it says that a priest walked by, Jesus says, priest walked by, saw him, and kept walking. A Levite walks by, sees the dude, keeps walking. A Samaritan walks by, sees the dude, and has compassion. And he says he comes to him and he binds his wounds. The word in the Greek for wounds is literally the word trauma. And so trauma, what has happened to this victim on the Jericho road is he has been traumatized. And when you think about all these characters in this parable, we have the Good Samaritan, we have the guy who's the victim, we have the priest, we have the Levite, we have the bandit, and we also have the innkeeper. Because there's really 6. Once the Good Samaritan gets the guy kind of cleaned up and puts him on some kind of beast of burden to take him, it says he brings him to an innkeeper and pays for him and says, hey, mend him overnight, you know, and if you use up extra money, I'll come and pay you. So there's 6 people in this parable. And as we talk through this series, I'm going to present to you the possibility that you and I have been, or we could be one of these 6 at various times in our life. You're like, what do you mean by that? Well, there are times, I'm just going to put this into your thinking, that you might have been beat up. You might be the recipient. You might be experienced and living in the constricts of trauma, like the victim on the Jericho road. There are times it's possible you might have been one of those bandits. You're like, no, I'm not. But just hear me out. All of us at one point in our lives, it's possible that we have been or we are one of these individuals in this parable. And so that's what this series is looking at. And it's a question to you. And so when we think about this, here's the question I want you to answer, and just leave it in the comments now. Who's your favorite character in this parable? You're like, who's your favorite character and why? So thank you again for subscribing. Hit the notification bell right there, and we'll keep you posted when we put up new content. And of course, we're going to continue our series next week, and it's going to be super, super fantastic, recovering from trauma.